The land now called Iran held 23 nations under a single throne before most of Europe had paved a road. In 500 BC, while the forests of North America stretched unbroken from coast to coast, Persia governed 70 million people across 3 continents. It minted standardized currency. It ran a postal relay faster than anything Europe would build for 2,000 years. It administered laws in dozens of languages across a territory spanning from modern Libya to modern Pakistan. The empire that built all of this did not do it with brute conquest alone. It did it with a system so precisely engineered that one specific military unit became its living symbol. A force of exactly 10,000 soldiers that never shrank, never weakened, and to any enemy watching from a distance, never lost a single man. The Greeks called them the Athanatoi, the Immortals. But the name was not Persian. It was invented by people who stood across the battlefield and could not explain what they were seeing. Every time a soldier fell, another appeared in his place. Not the next day, not the next campaign, sometimes within hours. The count never changed. The formation never thinned. To an enemy commander trying to calculate losses, the math made no sense. Behind that illusion was not magic or divine favor. It was logistics. The Persian military maintained a standing reserve corps, trained to the same standard, equipped with identical weapons, wearing the same robes. When an immortal was killed or wounded, a replacement stepped forward from the reserve column and filled the position before the next engagement began. The number held at 10,000. The formation stayed whole. The enemy saw a force that could not be diminished. And for 2 centuries, that perception shaped the ancient world. A man did not simply volunteer for this unit. He was selected. Herodotus tells us the Immortals drew from Persia's noble families, men of proven lineage and physical capability. A candidate trained from boyhood with the composite bow, the spear, and the short sword called an Achaemenid. He learned to fight mounted and on foot. By the time he entered the ranks, he had already spent more years preparing than most soldiers in the ancient world spent serving. But the selection carried weight far beyond the battlefield. Serving among the Immortals meant proximity to the King of Kings. In the Achaemenid hierarchy, closeness to the throne was power itself. 1,000 of the 10,000 served as the king's personal bodyguard, a unit within the unit called the Hazarapatis. Their spears carried golden pomegranates at the base instead of silver. That single detail separated a respected warrior from a man who could walk the inner halls of Persepolis and speak directly to the center of an empire. The center of that empire looked nothing like what most people imagine. Persepolis was not a mud-walled desert outpost. Its columns stood 20 meters high. Its staircases were carved with delegations from every subject nation, each figure rendered in precise detail. The Lydians carried gold bowls. The Babylonians brought a humped bull. The Indians led donkeys loaded with jars of powdered spice. The Ethiopians carried elephant tusks. These carvings still survive, still sharp enough to count the folds in each figure's robe. A woman in the administrative quarter of Persepolis presses a reed stylus into a wet clay tablet. She records barley rations for 700 workers, wine allocations measured in marish, livestock transfers for the military stores. She is not a scribe's assistant. The Persepolis fortification tablets reveal that women held supervisory positions in the empire's supply network, receiving wages that matched or exceeded those of male counterparts. The system feeding the Immortals passed through hands like hers before a single grain reached the column. That supply chain was built on infrastructure most people have never heard of. The royal road ran from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa, the administrative capital, covering roughly 1,600 miles. Mounted couriers traveled the entire distance in 7 days, using 111 posting stations, each holding fresh horses and riders. Herodotus wrote that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor darkness slowed them. That sentence was composed 24 centuries before any postal service claimed it as a motto. The road did not just carry messages. It moved troops, it moved grain. It moved information about rebellions before the rebels had finished gathering weapons. The Immortals themselves moved differently from any other ancient force. They did not forage. They did not strip the land they crossed. Their provisions traveled with them in a baggage train that included camels, mules, covered wagons carrying servants and concubines, stores of dried meat, roasted grain, and date wine. Where most armies left a trail of burned farms and emptied villages, the Immortals carried their world with them. They ate better on campaign than most civilians ate at home. Their equipment told its own story. Unlike Greek hoplites encased in heavy bronze, the Immortals wore scaled armor, overlapping plates of iron or bronze stitched onto leather tunics. Beneath the armor, richly dyed trousers and robes. Some ancient sources describe them fighting in silk. Their shields were wicker, light enough for long marches, dense enough to stop incoming arrows. Every detail pointed toward the same philosophy. This was a force designed to move fast, strike from distance, and remain in the field for months without resupply from a fixed position. Their primary weapon made that philosophy lethal. The Persian composite bow was shorter than later European longbows, but its layered construction of wood, horn, and animal sinew gave it devastating power over its size. A trained Immortal could drive an arrow through leather armor at 150 meters. In formation, 10,000 bows releasing simultaneously produced a volume of fire ancient sources compared to a shadow passing across the sun. The sound alone, 10,000 bowstrings releasing in a single breath, carried across the valley floor. But there was a flaw woven into the design. The same lightness that made the Immortals devastating in open terrain left them exposed in close combat. Wicker shields could not absorb the impact of a heavy bronze spear thrust at close range. Scaled armor offered less protection than the solid bronze cuirass of a Greek hoplite when bodies pressed together. In a narrow space where archery was useless and speed meant nothing, the Immortals lost every advantage their system was built on. Thermopylae was exactly that narrow space. The pass measured roughly 12 meters wide at its tightest point. Mountains rose on one side, the sea pressed against the other. There was no room for flanking, no angle for massed archery, no space for the cavalry that gave Persian forces their reach. When Xerxes ordered the Immortals into that gap in 480 BC, they met a wall of overlapping bronze shields that did not move. The Greeks fought shoulder to shoulder in phalanx formation. Each man's shield covered the man beside him. The Persians could not bring their numbers to bear. Herodotus records that Xerxes leapt from his throne 3 times watching the engagement unfold. The unit that had never visibly lost a man was losing them in full view of the King of Kings. The replacement system still functioned. Every fallen Immortal was replaced from the reserve. The count never dropped below 10,000. But for the first time, the replacement was visible to the enemy. The mechanism was exposed. The illusion that had paralyzed a dozen nations dissolved in a 12-meter gap between rock and sea. A young soldier in the reserve column stands behind the main line. He hears iron striking bronze. He holds the same spear, wears the same scaled armor, carries the same wicker shield as the man being dragged back past him. The soldier ahead steps forward to replace someone who is no longer standing. He shifts his grip. The silver pomegranate at the base of his spear presses into his palm. He does not know that the battle will be decided not here, but on a goat path through the mountains, shown to Xerxes by a local farmer named Ephialtes, hoping for a reward. That path, the Anapaea Trail, allowed a force of Persian soldiers to move behind the Greek position overnight. When dawn revealed Persians on both sides, most Greek contingents withdrew. The Spartans and 700 Thespians who stayed were killed to the last man. The Immortals finally pushed through. But the passage cost something no replacement system could restore. Every future enemy of the Persian Empire now possessed a piece of information worth more than any weapon. The Immortals could be held, they could stall, they could bleed visibly in front of witnesses. The system that replaced the Fallen still worked perfectly, but the terror it projected had fractured against a limestone cliff face. The Empire did not collapse at Thermopylae. It continued for another 150 years. The Immortals fought at Plataea. They garrisoned the imperial capitals. They stood ceremonial guard at Persepolis, while stone carvers continued adding figures to the Apadana staircase, the longest continuous sculptural narrative in the ancient world. But something underneath had shifted. The Persian system had revealed that it depended not on the strength of individual soldiers, but on the invisibility of the replacement mechanism. Once that mechanism was seen, it became a logistics fact rather than a source of fear. What most people never learn is what kept the empire running beneath the soldiers and the ceremony. In the hills outside Persepolis, engineers carved stone basins into bedrock, sealed them with waterproof plaster, and connected them to underground channels called canals. These tunnels carried snowmelt from the Zagros Mountains through gravity alone, some running 45 kilometers without a single mechanical pump. The water arrived cold and clean in the center of a desert plain. The Immortals drank from this system. The palace kitchens cooked with it. The administrative heart of the empire functioned because water moved silently underground, maintained by engineers whose names survive on no monument and no carved wall. When Alexander reached Persepolis in 330 BC, his soldiers looted the city for 5 consecutive days. Ancient sources claim 10,000 mules and 5,000 camels carried treasure out of the complex and could not hold it all. Then Alexander burned Persepolis. Whether it was a drunken impulse or deliberate revenge for Xerxes burning Athens 150 years earlier depends on which historian you follow. Diodorus says wine made the decision. Arrian says strategy did. The fire scorched the limestone relief carvings of the Immortals on the Apadana walls, leaving black streaks above their carved spear points that are still visible today. A stonemason in the centuries after the burning runs his fingers along the carved robe of an immortal figure. The spear is still sharp in the stone. The pomegranate counterweight at the shaft's base is still round, still perfect. Above the carving, Alexander's fire has left dark veins across the rock. The mason does not know that this wall will stand for another 2,000 years, and that people will travel from every continent to look at the soldiers carved into it. The Immortals disappeared not in a final battle, but in the administrative collapse that followed Alexander's conquests. The reserve system that had kept their number at 10,000 for 2 centuries simply stopped being maintained. No dramatic last stand, no legendary fall. The replacements stopped arriving, and the unit that could not be diminished was diminished to nothing. 500 years later, the Sasanian Empire revived the name for its own elite cavalry. The title carried weight across 1,000 years of Persian identity. 10,000, always replaced, always present. The replacement system was the real innovation, not the silk robes or the golden pomegranates or the composite bows. The idea that a military force could be engineered to appear permanent, that invulnerability could be manufactured through administration rather than strength. The Immortals did not need to be the greatest warriors in the ancient world. They needed to always be there. For 200 years, across 3 continents, governing 70 million people, they were. Iran's current military still invokes the name. The concept echoes through 25 centuries of continuous civilization on the same plateau where those 10,000 men first assembled. Whether the Immortals represented genuine military genius or a system whose greatest achievement was its own appearance depends on what you believe actually holds power together. What this story reveals about your own assumptions may have less to do with ancient Persia than with what you think makes a force unbreakable: the soldiers inside it, or the system that refuses to let it shrink. These reconstructions continue, one empire at a time,